Hi, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host, David Lesch. We are always encouraging you to stay connected. Tweet me at David Lesch. The usual battle between landlords and tenants has erupted in the news. There is so much to discuss. Lucky for us, we have here attorney Altagracia Pierre-Outerbridge, who has been here before, by the way, or not necessarily on set, but we had you on Zoom.
Yes.
You were talking about right to counsel a long time ago as a tenant, and which we know is so important. The reason why we wanted you back today, at least to talk a little bit about it, is it seems that, the pendulum between power, between landlords and tenants always seems to be back and forth and back and forth. And it looks like from where I'm sitting, the tenants have been getting a little bit more powerful based on what's been coming through Albany, or let's say the right to counsel, those types of things. I know you've been doing this a long time. Do you feel like the tenants are starting to gain a little traction here? Or is it still a landlord world in this city? Or what do you think?
Well, I'm always going to say, David, thanks for having me. I'm always going to say that it's a case-by-case basis. Depends on the facts, depends on the judge, right? Depends on a whole lot of things, right? Depends on the clerk in the courthouse. What is happening mostly at this point where landlords are were able to get paid during the pandemic somewhat is that landlords are back with a lot of non-payment actions, right? Trying to get paid. I think tenants are at a disadvantage again. While the pandemic era laws, right, protected them, the safety net, what we call it a safety net, protected them. That safety net has ended. So we're back to the same, the position where tenants no longer have much protection in housing court.
So what do you think it is? And is it the tenants haven't been able to pay their rent because the stimulus has been cut? The moratorium is over. What's the reasoning? I mean, why can't the tenants seem to get back on their feet? Is it just they're not getting subsidies? Or is it just things are coming through the courthouse again and now it's all of a sudden they're being expected to leave?
It's all of what you just said, David. It's all of what you just said. Tenants, a lot of tenants are still carrying the pandemic debt, right? The ERAP, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, was not able to pay for all the debt. We have tenants coming to us owing 20, 30, 40K, and that clearly was not solely from post-pandemic. Some of the so for some tenants, the ERAP paid some, but not for the whole of it. Some tenants, I believe the ERAP overpaid, so it's very unclear how the ERAP made the determination, but a lot of tenants were left out of the equation. So at this point, there were some protections that were kept on by New York State, i.e. if you applied for the ERAP, but that ended in January. If you applied for the ERAP, even if there were no monies available, the fact that you applied kept your eviction from proceeding forward. Right now, there's no real safety net except having a good attorney, obviously. And I'm going to talk about the right to counsel again.
If you could, please, because that's so important. I mean, to have somebody with you there who knows the law, who could advocate for you, tell it, maybe you can give the viewers a little bit of a refresher. That would be important if you could.
Sure. The right to counsel was passed, and what it did is it, just like in criminal court, it provided for tenants who qualified income-wise and zip code-wise for a free lawyer in housing court. A lot of the difficulties that are occurring now is that there are not enough tenant attorneys to carry out the right to counsel mandate. So what's happening is tenants are going to court and getting what we call brief counseling, which is 5 to 10 minutes, and being told, go before the judge and make that argument, right? Never sounds the same coming from a pro se person. But ideally, if the right to counsel were properly effectuated, then most tenants would have a housing court attorney. I have some problems with the, and I'm not able to tell you the exact numbers, but probably the income limit should be raised and the zip codes widened because the pandemic really equalized a lot of folks from different walks of life, different professions. I've seen, we have engineers as clients, we have, right, who naturally before the pandemic would not be non-payment clients, but a lot of people now from all walks of life, right, and all income levels are still carrying that debt. So Ideally, the right to counsel would be expanded, right, to include higher incomes, right, and more zip codes. But that's where we are now with basically actually having attorneys on the ground. I actually recently received an email, not quite from New York City, but from New York State, saying we are so out of attorneys that we're looking for private attorneys to join the right to counsel because there's not enough attorneys.
Why is that?
Wow, that's a good question.
People are not signing up. I mean, you get paid. Mm-hmm. I mean,
that's a good question. It's a tough job. I did it for a decade. It's a very tough job. It's mentally exhausting. It's really being a public servant, right? And it requires a lot of passion. So, I mean, if your head is not in it, you can't really do it. So it takes a specific type of attorney to be able to do that, because the tenants don't have the resources. The stories are all sad and horrible, right? About who you're helping. So it takes a certain type of person, and it exhausts you emotionally and physically.
So tell me, what do you do for a tenant? A tenant comes into your office and says, look, I've been served with a non-payment proceeding. What do you do for them? Like, what's the first thing you do? You put in an answer? Do you call up the landlord's attorney? How do you usually handle it?
So we try not to do non-pays, right, out of equity for folks who come to us, because what we counsel them, we often do brief counseling and say, this is what you do. You go to housing court, you do an answer, because we always try to balance the legal fees, right, compared to what's owed. And if it doesn't match up, then we don't get involved unless there's another issue in the apartment, i.e. overcharge, etc. What we tell the tenant usually, if we are taking the case, is that we ask how they were served. We basically develop the defenses. We find out if the apartment is improperly deregulated. We find out if the rent is correct. We ask about repairs, because as long as we're there, we might as well make sure we leave with the tenant feeling comfortable with all aspects of living in the place. We ask about harassment. So we cover the whole gamut. So if folks come to us with solely non-pay issue, we usually delve into everything else to make sure that at the end of representation, they feel that the apartment is up to par on every level.
And what have you seen in court recently? Does it seem that the tenants are being treated fairly? What are your thoughts?
I believe, I don't think it's the court position to propose defenses. So to the extent that tenants are treated fairly, they have to come forth with their own defenses. The court, being a mediator, doesn't quite come up with the defenses. So the issue returns back to, does the tenant have counsel? Do they know their defenses? Are papers being put in properly, timely, right? Is the approach, the defense, aggressive enough? In that sense, judges are reviewing motions, oral arguments are happening to make sure the defenses are being properly adjudicated.
Okay, let's put on your landlord cap for a second. Okay, let's flip sides here. What's the story about landlords? Are they happy with the way things are progressing in the city? Are they getting their money quicker? What are your thoughts?
Landlords are never happy. We try. Landlords are never happy, right? So, and we love them, right? We represent them just as well. But, they always have felt that the housing court process takes so long. They have a bad name. We represent small and large landlords. The small one believe that they are carrying the burden and the name, that they are being confused with big landlords, right? Folks who own 2-family homes, right? 3-family homes are really still trying to demarcate themselves from big landlords with hundreds of apartments and saying, how are we being treated the same? We need the money to pay our mortgage. There really should be some type of demarcation that treats us differently and markets us differently, right? So one of the initiatives that has come to be implemented because of this is the small property part. So each borough now has a small property part, which is a room where small landlords' cases are heard. The attorney has to propose it and ask that it be transferred. But the point there is to make sure that the cases are moving faster, because to consider what a small landlord has to go through. One of the big things, you asked me what tenants are going through. Tenants, we're getting calls daily about tenants facing 20, 30, 40% increases in rent. That comes at all hours of the night, all hours of the day. I'm always shocked as to what the rent increases are. So that's really a lot of what we're dealing with now. the landlords making up for pandemic losses by increasing the rent, proposing increase of 40, 50, 60%.
Final thoughts, okay? Tips. Somebody's watching today, it's a landlord, and you want to make sure the landlord gets the right type of tip. Not tenant, but we're going to start with the landlord this time. What tips would you give to a landlord to make sure that they're protected?
Don't let the rent accumulate, right? That's huge, because if the tenant is not able to pay today, it's unlikely they'll be able to pay in 6 months. So follow up on payment of the rent. Try to reach a deal with the tenant as to when the rent will be paid. Do not let it accumulate, because as it accumulates, it becomes unpayable, right? Seek counsel right away and get to court right away.
Okay, tenants now. What's your best advice that you would give to a tenant? You can give a few, because I know the tenants need a little bit more help.
In terms of tenants, keep track. If you're being served, keep track of how you're being served, right? That's a huge defense in court. Seek counsel right away, right? Check to see if your apartment, always check to see if you're being charged the right rent. One of the things you can do is by seeking what we call a rent history from DHCR to make sure that your rent and have an attorney analyze that to make sure that you're not being overcharged, right? Keep in communication with your landlord regarding repairs. Make sure that your repair requests are in writing and that you follow up. If your requests for repairs are being ignored, then you can commence a case. It's not burdensome to commence a case in housing court for repairs. It's called an HP action.
I love it.
All right.
All right, next time you come back, I want to talk to you a little bit about gas stoves, electric stoves. We can talk a little bit about that the next time.
Please.
Because there's so many things that we need to talk to you about.
I will.
Right. But of course, thanks. It's nice seeing you in person.
Sure.
I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course you, the viewers, for watching. If you missed any part of today's show, be sure to check it out at bronxnet.tv. Also remember, if there's a legal issue or topic you'd like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to contact me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org or tweet me at davidlesch, and make sure to hashtag #AskToday'sVerdict. From myself and all of us at Today's Verdict, always remember, know your rights, know your issues, reach a verdict. I'm David Lesch, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks with an all-new episode of Today's Verdict. Take care.